Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Chat with Leaders. It's my pleasure to introduce Jay Weiser, principal and founder of Jay Weiser Consulting, who is passionate about helping leaders and organizations thrive in the face of disruptiveness and uncertainty. We are certainly in a disruptive and uncertain time right now, so I think this is an appropriate conversation for us. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, it is disruptive. I mean, just think over the last weekend, First Republic Bank failed and was taken over by JP Morgan Chase, and Bed Bath & Beyond filed Chapter 11. So, yeah, there's always something happening.
Yeah, there really is. And this is such an appropriate time to introduce us into the fold of leadership discussions because it's so hard to lean into the uncertain times and figure out how to A, prepare for it, but B, face it in that time of disruption with your team and to communicate. And speaking of communication, I wanted to note that to our audience that you speak with the assistance of cochlear implants, which I think is amazing because it's enabled you to continue pursuing your passion for leadership and helping others despite any hearing challenges that you've had along the way. So I'm so grateful, A, for the technology, and B, for you sharing your gift of time and wisdom with us today.
Absolutely. The nice thing is I don't have to wear headphones. I just have these guys on and it streams direct.
Yeah, what an advantage. Well, I love that. Well, let's start with the first question, Jay. I wanted to ask you what's different about the business environment now compared to 20 years ago, and what challenges does that present to leaders today and into the future?
Sure. So the thing is, the pace of change is so much higher. Things are happening so much quicker. Lightning speed almost. Things are so much more interconnected. We saw that with COVID. We saw, somebody having a virus in China in a matter of weeks was around the world. And in some places, even sooner. You think about the barge that got stuck in the Suez Canal had global ramifications. People very often say, oh, that's a black swan event. Well, if you look over the last 20 years, we probably had one or two black swans every year, whether it was 9/11, whether it was Hurricane Katrina, whether it was the Great Recession, now banking issues, recession issues, COVID, supply chain, Ukraine, all these things are happening. So we as leaders need to be better prepared. The risk, if we're not paying attention to what's going on, is we get surprised, we get caught unprepared, we're forced to react, which is based on emotions, not information. And that puts us in a not so good place.
Yeah, gosh, so many things that we're facing today. And even with the advancement of AI and the way that information is distributed now and having to keep up with just the advanced knowledge that's being shared and how that's being accelerated, even more with the technology is just so profound. And even some of the companies that have the best strategies and execution plans in place, you said, can still be caught off guard and unprepared. Why do you think that is?
Not paying attention. Organizations, leadership teams get complacent. They're successful. Everything's humming along. They think they're, not vulnerable to what's happening around them. Yes, they have a large market share. They think they have, great customers. As I told my son when I was teaching him how to drive, if you go over a bump in the road or a pothole at 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, not a big deal. If you're going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, bad things happen. And, it's the same thing with companies. They hit a disruption. They go, oh, okay, we can solve this. We can address this now. And then, they learn something and then they go back to normal again. And they're unprepared instead of retaining those lessons. So it helps awareness and preparedness are really important. I think part of it too goes back to where do you look? If you're so firm centric. You're looking at yourself, a little bit of navel gazing. Then you're not paying attention to what's around you, and it's not just it's in your company, it's in your community, your ecosystem, in your industry, all the way out to the macro environment that you have to be paying attention because you can be impacted. You think about something like Ukraine. I remember when it first happened, and I'm saying, that's an awful humanitarian crisis. Awful.
Mm.
But it doesn't affect me. Yes, stuff's going on in Europe and so on. And then all of a sudden, a week later, gas goes from, $3 a gallon to $5 a gallon. Now it's my problem. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
problem of, every business, anybody who's shipping anything, delivering anything, that becomes a big change.
Wow. Yeah, it's such a good point. And you mentioned the word normal in that too. And it makes me think of this conversation about what is the new normal as we came out of COVID and we're facing this disruption and we're trying to define that. But the reality is it's almost like nothing's normal anymore because of the pace of change is so accelerated. So you have mentioned in our conversations before that amid that new capabilities are needed. So my question is why, and what will they help companies do when they can define those new capabilities?
So, I think, part of this normal is change, normal is disruption. There is no stability in the sense of everything staying the same. I like to use a helicopter as an example. A helicopter is stable when it's on the ground. And when a helicopter is hovering, it's also stable, but it's doing an awful lot. The pilot has to be working an awful lot to stay in place. And it's the same type of thing in a business environment. You can't just put things on autopilot. So, as you're starting to think about what's going on around you, it's important. I talk about the need to see, think, and do differently. And, it's about, I talked, just a moment ago about looking and seeing in different places. It's about thinking differently, different models, different mindsets, frameworks, being curious, being open. Uh, and seeing and thinking is great, but it doesn't matter unless you do something differently. So that's really important. The
Yeah.
other thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think I want to talk about some of these, what are the new capabilities that are needed. But I like what you said there about see, think, and do differently in this curiosity. If you're just so set in your ways of this is what normal is, you're never able to adapt. And I think we've all learned the importance of adaptability, through all of the things that you listed before. And you do such a great job of confronting those realities. That's something my father always taught me growing up when he was in leadership, is to confront realities early and often, and that's always stuck with me. And I think that's a huge thing that you're bringing to the leadership marketplace. So, what are the new capabilities that are needed? Let's get into that.
Sure. So the new capabilities, I call the model the Five Leadership Superpowers. And the thing is, when I looked at companies can be doing all the right things. You mentioned about strategy. They can be communicating, they can have a vision, metrics, all these things. But something is still lacking. And what I came across is that there are five tensions that leaders need to address when you're in a world of disruption and uncertainty. The first tension is between present and future. Now, the model, and I'll kind of talk about this briefly, it's not a choice of either present or future. This requires
Mm,
both and thinking. So you have to be thinking about and looking at the present, and at the same time, you have to be looking towards the future. It's about better understanding the present from different perspectives, being able to zoom in, zoom out. It's also about looking towards the future. Do you know where you're going?
mm,
Are you tracking trends? Are you monitoring, what's going on in the environment And then are you integrating that together to inform how you make decisions? So being a present futurist is that first capability. The second capability is looking at that tension between experience and expertise in learning. So very often, and I can think of countless examples, just people I was talking to at the beginning of COVID, and they're like, oh, we just need to do what we did before. We want to go back to that. And if that doesn't work, we're going to try that doubly as hard. Well, it still doesn't work. So it's balancing that experience and expertise you have with learning. And learning requires you to be curious. Learning requires you to ask questions. Learning requires you to encourage and foster debate. Listen to a diversity of views in your company. And most importantly, make it safe for people to do that. So you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. If you have some experience and expertise and it works, great. If it's not working, challenge it. Maybe even challenge it ahead of time and say, is there a better way? Is the situation so different that I need to do something differently? So the second superpower is being an experienced learner.
So let me just pause there for a second because I want to go into all five of these. But the experienced learner, something that you said in there that really resonated with me was that you have to make it safe. Psychological safety within companies is something that I've heard of quite a bit, and being able to invite and amplify diverse voices into those leadership decisions is and can be a superpower. But with that, you really have to make a strong invitation to the table and be willing to do the self work, to listen and to be able to experience a diversity of views that maybe aren't aligned with your own. And so I really, really like that. That's part of this, the tension, to be a learner, and that's part of the new capabilities. Can we let's dive into the other three because I'm curious to continue to
Sure.
unpack this with you.
Let me just add one thing, and
Yeah,
that
sure.
that is if you're not doing the work, if you're not asking the questions, you're not open-minded, or if all of a sudden you shut somebody down, your biggest risk is getting bad news late. And, and it's your own fault if that happens because you haven't created an environment where people want to tell you what's going on, where people want to challenge the status quo.
Hmm. I totally agree with that. Yeah. And if you just have people that are only there to agree with you and say yes ma'am, yes sir, whatever, you're never gonna progress.
It,
So I've always said I like people that bring new ideas and challenge the status quo and challenge me because I don't have it all figured out, even leading my own small business, right? So it's always good to have people around you that are willing to speak up, but also know that it's safe to do so.
sure. No,
So thank you
absolutely.
for sharing that.
So the third tension is between preparedness and risk taking. So, first of all, it's important to recognize that risk is a part of business. Very often when things get rough, when things get bumpy, people get very defensive. They focus on loss avoidance, and they're cautious. They button down and they buckle up. And again, risk taking is part of business. Everything involves some level of risk, but you want to be taking smart risks. You want to be taking small risks. You want to experiment. You want to pilot. Now, at the same time, preparedness is so important. And the thing that's interesting, I remember I gave a talk right before COVID, and I was talking about the importance of preparedness, literally 6 weeks before COVID hit, January 26, 2020. I remember the day. And I was giving this talk, and as I was doing it, people were like, oh, yeah, preparedness is nice. They kind of rolled their eyes. Why would I want to do that? It's expensive. Why should I prepare for something that's never going to
Mhm.
happen? Well, 6 weeks later, COVID hit the fan. And, all of a sudden, like, what you said was really important. Now, Preparedness involves a couple of things. One is about being far more risk aware. Don't just think of the the fire, the data breach, warehouse burns down, uh, product liability. Those are things in a lot of cases you get insurance for, you have business continuity for. But what about a competitor coming out with a new product? What about a customer saying, we don't like the service you're delivering, we're going to go over to X? And it's those things. It's illness. It's, people working from home. It's, recession. You can't get insurance against recession, but you have to be paying attention to those signals. So in a lot of cases, preparedness can be really basic. I had a talk last week with an HR audience, and I kind of went around the room and I said, okay, who has WD-40? All the hands went up. Who has a flashlight, batteries at home? Who has an emergency contact list, duct tape? Who keeps some bottles of water around? And, I suspect, for those of us who are married, our wives are now making sure we have toilet paper. And certainly a higher stock level than we ever had before. Same thing for wipes. So the thing is, if you take those things and apply it in a corporate environment, a lot of these things are low risk, no regret moves. If we know, in an emergency, what's the first thing we do? The second thing we do? How do we make sure, if I lived in Florida, I'd be paying attention to the weather over the summer because I want to see what storms are coming. I think, if you lived on the coast in Florida and you're like, oh, I never watch the weather, I'll just figure it out when it happens. You'd be bleep out of luck.
Thanks for keeping it clean on the show, Jay. No, you're absolutely right. And I love this prepared risk taker as this other 5 superpower. And then I know there's 2 others I want to get into as well. So which one do you typically cover as the next one in the hierarchy? I'm sure they're all equally important.
Yes,
so there's no stack rank order.
And the next one is between strategy and execution, or strategy and operations. So, a lot of people in a crisis, in a disruption, or even just naturally, operations always crowds out strategy. The urgent always crowds out the important. And you need to balance both, because if all you're focusing on is operations, you're going to be really, really busy, but you're not going to be sure where you're going and whether it's going to help you get to where you want to go. On the other hand, if all you do is talk about strategy and you can't execute, it's like a dream. And, again, unless you act, it's not going to happen. Now, what we saw during COVID is, and again, this goes back to not being prepared, to being reactionary. If you think about the airlines, for example, what did they do? They lost 95% of their customers, their business, in a week. Now, most of them, they started slashing, they started doing layoffs, firing people, mothballing planes, not really thinking about their employees, not really thinking about the future. Here in Atlanta, we have Delta Airlines. Their CEO, Ed Bastian, approached it very differently. He came out, and I guess this within a week or two, probably a week of COVID happening, he was very clear to employees. He said, we have 3 priorities. The first one is take care of our employees and customers. It's about safety. It's about service. 2, protect cash, because we don't know how long this is going to last. 3, protect our future. Not a single other airline CEO came out publicly and said at that point in time, we need to protect our future. And that drove a lot of their decisions, because they knew that short-term decisions can have long-term implications. So it's being able to balance the two, recognize that if you do something in the short term, if they did what other airlines did, their employee engagement, employee loyalty, all of that would have gone down the tank. But because they handled that differently, it didn't, and people came back faster. And Delta was in a better position. Now, nothing's perfect, and they each had their problems with staffing, but Delta was far more successful and is now far more respected than the other airlines. So when you can
Yeah.
integrate strategy and execution together and know they have to work hand in hand, it makes a big difference.
Such a good story. And Ed Bastian, I mean, that was one of the best leadership stories I think that came out of that disruption and uncertain time, the way he handled the communication. So, really good, poignant example there. And then what's the final of the 5 leadership superpowers to share with our audience?
So the final one is between accountability and collaboration. So first of all, let's talk about collaboration for a moment. And that is pretty much everything we have to do requires working with other people, requires working with other functions, other parts of the business, even working with uh, organizations and people in our ecosystem, suppliers, partners, distributors. Sometimes even you have to work with competitors for the benefit of both organizations. So that's really important. The second part around accountability, and this is where the conflict comes in, is a lot of people say, who do I need to point the finger at? Who do I go to if something's wrong? And I always say strategy is a team sport. So, going after an individual is not going to solve the problem. I joke,
Hmm.
Jeff, you and I were working for the same company and we're on a boat. Let's just say a rowboat, keep it simple. And I go, oh, Jeff, you got a hole under your seat. You have to fix that. That's your problem. Well,
Hmm.
I'm in the boat with you. I'm going to get awful wet thinking it's just your problem. So,
Yeah.
it's the same thing with companies. So, if you're an accountable collaborator, the first thing is you focus on accountability for outcomes. So, the team is working towards that outcome. You think about a soccer team. They're worried about scoring goals, winning games. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter who has the ball the most or, who kicked it the farthest or who ran the fastest. The team works together and they're focused on winning the game. And they know they can't do that unless they all work together. And the team kind of manages itself. They hold each other accountable for being in the right place at the right time, for knowing where the ball is going to go and where they need to be. And
Hmm.
it's the same thing. You never have a coach who runs out on the field and says, you need to be here, you need to be there, in terms of micromanaging, but we do that all the time in our businesses instead of, enabling and empowering our people to do the job and deliver the results.
Such great examples. Yeah. So we've got present futurist, experienced learner, prepared risk taker, a strategic executor, and accountable collaborator.
Yes.
The 5 leadership superpowers. Such a good word for me. Curious because we work with a lot of benefit companies, B Corps, conscious capitalist companies. There's for profit, there's nonprofit, there's private versus public. Do these superpowers differ across these different industries and different functions and roles of leadership?
No, no. I mean, they really apply, across the board. And that was something, as I was coming up with these ideas, I kept on saying, well, would it work in this situation? Would it work in that situation? Would it work if you're a leader? Would it work if you're a mid-level manager? Uh, and it applies. It applies across industries. If you're a B Corp or you're a nonprofit, you still have to look at what's happening today and where are we going to tomorrow. What are we trying to solve for? What are we trying to deliver? Uh, nonprofits, and they had to be experienced learners. It wasn't just about fundraising the same way they did, because if that fundraising was done in person, they had to learn a new way of fundraising. And even now, some of those new ways are carrying on. It's not like, okay, let's go back to the way we used to do it.
Right.
It caused us to think differently, and now we have a better way of doing it, or a different way of doing it, a way to reach different audiences. So it applies whether you're big or small, public or private. I mean, it's the same issues that companies and organizations are facing.
Hmm. Well, I'd love to land the plane here with any practical advice that you could offer to an early stage entrepreneur, such as myself and my leadership team, or even seasoned executive leaders that could be immediately applied today to develop and strengthen their leadership capabilities in the face of disruption and the ongoing uncertainty that we're in today.
I think a couple of quick things. One is just really paying attention, being aware of your environment. Part of that is what's close to you, talking to your employees, talking to your customers. And as you think about with your business, as you're looking to grow, as you're looking to scale, that outside environment becomes so much more important. Your business is, as you build out your business, it's based on a set of assumptions. And as those assumptions evolve, your business has to adapt. Because, I say it's very rare that when an entrepreneur starts with an idea that exactly what they said on day one is going to happen. They have to constantly adjust. And, seasoned executives, companies who've been doing the same thing for years, same thing. You know, when circumstances change, you have to adapt. I mean, Darwin said, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of those who can adapt to the circumstances, who can adjust. It's not the strongest that survive, it's the most adaptive that do. I think the other thing that's important is being curious, asking questions, recognizing you don't have all the answers, just taking the time to say, you're in a group, you're with your team, say, well, what do you think? Instead of saying, we need to look out for this or this or this, change the question and ask, what would knock us over? And if instead of saying, what are the 5 most important risks, change the question and say, what could knock us over? Makes it more open ended, and think about other things that you might assess and say, okay, that's really unlikely. On the other hand, you might identify some things. What would cause our customers not to buy from us? Products are bad, service is bad, they can't reach us. Our online portal goes down. These are all different things that you can then prepare for and think through and have scenarios. So, I think it's each of those things. And I think the thing that's interesting, the power of the superpowers comes from all 5. Each one supports and reinforces the other. Now, a leadership team should have ultimately all 5 amongst the team of leaders. An individual is probably going to be proficient in 1, 2, maybe even 3. But I've never met anybody, I mean, even myself, I wouldn't say I'm proficient in all 5. I'm probably really good at 3. Probably some people might say 2, but 2 to 3. I also know there are 2 that I need help. I need a counterpart who, kind of pushes me on that, questions me on that.
Yeah, amen. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, this has been incredibly insightful for me and so hyper relevant to what I'm experiencing as an entrepreneur, as a growing business. And, speaking of curiosity, it's just such a gift for me to sit here and learn with you. And I know that this will have a tremendous benefit to everybody that listens. And I'd be remiss not to ask you, Jay, is this something that you can help with? And how do you help people with this?
So, yeah, yes, it's something I can help with. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is I can't do this for you. You can't hire, one of the big four and say, come in and do this for me. You have to be able to do it. You have to be able to sustain it. Leadership needs to be involved and committed. But as I say it in a lot of my presentations, but you don't have to do it alone. Very often, having a third party who can challenge you, can ask questions, can help coach you so you make it safe for others to do. And I do that through public speaking, hosting seminars, executive briefings, leadership team meetings where I can come in and talk, introduce the concepts. I also do it through training. So, we go through the five superpowers, but then we get into, okay, so how does this work in your business? What does this mean you would do? Where would you look? What resources would you go to? Having tools and templates that help you in that process. Very often it's, the third leg of that is to do an assessment. You might say, I don't know if we need to do this. I'm not sure. Some of us do, some of us don't. Do an assessment. I conduct a survey. I interview your executive team because chances are they'll tell me things that they don't necessarily tell each other. And, that brings a lot of information out, and you can see where there might be gaps. You'll see where there are strengths. You'll be able to prioritize which superpower do I need to work on more? Because you can't, it's impossible to work on all five intensely at the same time. But over time, you want to build that. And as part of all of those, I do coaching. Working with executives to help them make that change.
Well, it's incredibly valuable, Jay. And this time together, your experience and expertise with the Five Leadership Superpowers has been truly inspiring. And we appreciate your valuable insights on how to thrive in disruptive and uncertain times. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.